Okay, all right. Hi, good morning, everyone. I assume you can hear me well and see the PowerPoint. Good morning. It's the 16th of November, a Tuesday. Mass Media and Culture course, lecture number 9. This one's on film essays or video essays. Not an assignment, the phenomenon of film essays in the mass media. The sort of thing that we've already seen a little bit of with, for example, Letter to Jane. But there are many others. So let's talk about them for a little bit. What is a film essay? So the film essay is a style of it's not quite documentary, it's not a feature, it can be as long as a feature, but it's a form of making a film that has something to say, tries to say something anyway, tries to get you to see the world in a certain way or change the way you see the world. And we can point to a few very famous examples. Maybe one of the early ones, Man with a Movie Camera by Dziga Vertov. Very impressive film from the Soviet Union in 29, okay. And then I don't know who else. What else? We could talk about. Even show some of Koyana Squatsi by Michael Riesman, music of Philip Glass, and so on. Koyana Squatsi. I don't know whether anyone's ever seen that, but we'll look at some of it today, simply because it's amazing. And hopefully will change the way you, not change the way you see things. Will be interesting because it was the film that celebrated the way the camera could change the way we see things. But now I think it seems completely routine. And that's the significance of showing the film now. A film from 1982, at a time when the availability of video technology for people was starting to widen from specialist directors in the big movie houses and people with enough money to buy a camera. It was becoming more available, and editing was becoming more, well, some will say tricksy. Okay, it was already tricksy back if you go to the 1930s and the great films of film essays like Le Chien Andalou and La Cage d'Or by Buñuel, Le Chien Andalou with Salvador Dali, or the more difficult, problematic Leni Riefenstahl films under the National Socialists, under the Nazis, Triumph of the Will about the 1933 Nuremberg rally, and Olympia about the Berlin Olympics. Jesse Owens won the sprint, and Hitler refused to acknowledge him because he was a black man. Right through to, well, the present, but the real high point of the film essay, I guess, was Godard's work that we saw, Letter to Jane, and then flourishing in the 70s and 80s. The films with Chris Marker, Sans Soleil, and several others. Sunless, Sans Soleil, without sun. And I think one of the greatest films, about fake media and so on, F is for Fake, by Orson Welles in 1973. So a very late film in his career, and a very great film. Not as well acknowledged, acknowledged by some, acknowledged by Welles fans for sure. You know, so this is the film essay, and I guess the documentary film is a film essay as well, but there's somehow a sense that is different, because a documentary well, there are different styles of documentary, right? Verite documentary, kind of fly on the wall, observational camera, or something with a voiceover saying this is what's going. I mean, the film essay can have a voiceover, but it's often very. The interpretation is upfront. It's often political. I know Roger, and there are so many. I won't go into naming all of them. You can imagine there are whole PhDs in film studies written on this particular form, and of course it merges with some of the more polemical political features. I don't know whether Battle of Algiers would be considered a film essay, but it might be by some. All right, but I have in mind something that's usually maybe 30 minutes, very political, uses images to push across a certain interpretation, to change the way you see the world, right? Often it's like, right, think of Goddard focusing on that photograph of Jane Fonda, saying this is just a photograph, but look, we can really study this for 52 minutes or whatever, and see much more in it, change the way in which you see an image. That might be true of how you see the camera, or how you see, I don't know, with La Cage d'Or by or Shane Andalou. I mean, I'm not going to show images from that because I did that in a class. I used to do that in a class years ago, and there's one sequence of an eye being cut. It's not a human eye, but still, it's a little bit problematic. Shocking but famous, right? So go and look it up if you're not squeamish. And Triumph of the Will I won't show because, I mean, yeah, I could, but it's long, and it's also a fascist film, even though she goes on to, well, it's still problematic. She goes on to take photographs of black men in the Sudan, the Nuba, in her career after the war. She was much beloved by Hitler, and there's no reason to do more than acknowledge her genius in putting cameras on trolleys and moving cameras and, innovations in film style. But I won't show it. I will show Koyanda Squatsi a bit, simply because it's amazing. But I also want to talk about whether or not this style of film, the film essay, San Salio by Chris Marker, beloved of media studies people, film studies people especially. I mean, there are so many books on Chris Marker. I mean, he died recently, quite elderly. I mean, there were still books coming out a few years ago. Some people who knew nothing about what they were talking about wrote books on Chris Marker, and some who were very much into cinema studies people. Some of the media and communication stuff is. Anyway, the question I want to address today, or one of them, is a bit smaller, I suppose, and maybe more idiosyncratic, is whether or not this form of essay making has taken a dive in the present time. Whether or not this style of filmmaking can survive the new media environment, right? Because it came about in the 20th century as a kind of speciality of author directors who were, saying something. It was a time when the camera was being able to speak on the camera and make a film was somehow becoming more accessible, but not completely accessible yet to filmmakers. They were not making just feature films, but could have something to say and then have the money together to say it. And especially in the 70s and 80s, when video got involved, it was starting to become something that almost anyone could do. And eventually, with film editing software in everyone's pocket now, anyone could do, but we don't. And I want to get us to think about why that moment that where the film essay was really taken seriously isn't really available to us anymore. I mean, it is, but it's not as central anymore because we have TikTok and we have well, this is the point. At present, we have an abundance of little films that we can watch on our Facebook or Zalo feed or whatever. It's almost, you have to spend a lot of time setting up your adjusting your settings so that you don't see these films all the time because they are on autoplay by default, or they even once you click them on, watch a little bit of it and decide you don't want to watch it, you turn it off, it pops out and starts playing again, and maybe that's just my feed, is my settings are wrong, but the point is that we have an abundance of little bits of film, but we are in the habit of not watching them through. And that's interesting because we have a debate that's been going on, and it started around the same time as the film essay about how people are losing their capacity for staying with something, concentration. I mean, this is Adorno's critique as well, that people are forced into the cinema for sensation, sit in the dark hall watching the screen in the days of being able to go to the cinema, right through to now the lament that you hear from some panic merchants that say the media is destroying children's attention. They have attention deficit disorder, and no one concentrates anymore. No one takes anything in. It's all about sensation and the next thing. Right? So that the speed of the film essay, which is slower, contemplative, often, not full of sensational car chases and whiz bang, whiz bang, whiz bang. It's that speed seems tedious. You know, at the same time, my kids, as I've said here, they'll watch someone with an American accent talking about different products you can add to your Minecraft inventory for hours and not get bored, but they can't seem to concentrate on educational videos for very long. Maybe it's just lamenting that is belonging to an older generation that, you know, also back in my day we didn't like rock and roll music, or when I was a kid, the parents went, "What's that stuff you're listening to?" Nowadays, yeah, the older generation always goes about new media events. Like, what's that? It's not like in the old days we used to have to walk 25 miles through the snow just to get to school. But no, the good thing is it's a discussion that things like TikTok have captured the properties of film production. And in the same way, Twitter captured the possibilities of making a public statement. And what does that mean? What does this technology and the format of presenting technology in bite-size, almost commodified packets, what does it mean for the way we're being rewired? Are we being rewired? That question. So this is the thing that I want to consider as something that I think has not irreparably, it's happened. It's irreversible in a sense that there is now an increased availability and the platforms for quick consumption of short video grabs is more available, more ready, more approved, more somehow endorsed by the wider cultural acceptance than the kind of thing that was possible in the film essay in the 70s and 80s, where one went out to a cinema as a kind of entertainment to hear what Godard had to say on Vietnam, or what to see. Have you seen the Chris Marker film, or even Godard's later stuff on 100 Years of Cinema and so on, right? Which are longer, contemplative, thoughtful, demanding pieces of work. And this is the thing about TikTok and Twitter and these new models. They're not that demanding. Even at the same time, there is a demand behind it, which is that you be up to date. You have seen the latest thing, the latest. Did you see that video? Did you see that? Almost TikTok. It says, this is a very Adorno-like point. It says what you've got to be like. You've got to be looking at this and then looking at that. TikTok. Every second there's a new thing to look at, right? And Twitter is well named as well, because it's just the sounds of endless chatter that is no longer about the content so much as the urgency and the abundance of it, and being up to date, and the requirement in the culture that you be up to date. And that's why I've got this image here as well of 10 books which are like how to get ahead books, how to get ahead in creative thinking, in mindful, in using your mind to have a good day, to achieve, to win, to be an innovator, to be the boss in life, and so on. It's by digesting all of the self-help available in all of the literature in a 10-minute sequence, right? Change your life in 10 easy steps. 5 easy steps, that'll be even quicker. 2 easy steps. Well, and these things are kind of amazingly abundantly available in the stores. I'm pretty shocked that in Vietnam, the most translated English language books seem to be self-help books. And it seems slightly more than other places like, I don't know, Malaysia, or certainly more than India. I mean, India has that, like the bookstores that have the how to get ahead in business books. They exist, but not as many. Like in Phahasa, you see quite a lot of these. So this is a weird kind of paradox. On the one hand, it doesn't matter what you're looking at as long as you're looking at something. On the other, you've got to achieve and innovate and be ahead of the pack. And that demand, I think, is somehow anxiety producing rather than contemplation producing or thought producing. It doesn't make you mindful or make you think through things. It means it requires you to have the latest theory, set of rules, 12 rules for living. What's it? Jordan Peterson, right? The latest sensation. No, it's probably not the latest because it was 2 years ago. The latest sensation will only be a couple of months old, won't it? And I'm not saying that these are completely useless. Maybe I'm saying that, but Jordan Peterson. And they're often just common sense stuff. But the phenomenon is I get the feeling, and I may be just an old geezer complaining about it, but I get the feeling that there's an increasing intensity in this requirement that you have the latest thing. And yet I want people to have the latest thing. Of course I do, but to really have it, not just to, get the next shiny thing before the next shiny thing comes and then the next shiny thing, but to stay with something, to get to know it well. And you don't get to know well by having it digested in there used to be a thing called the Reader's Digest, all right? So that now the Reader's Digest was quite a phenomenon. It was slightly abridged versions of great literature or essays put out in a magazine for people who were too busy to read the whole thing. And its heyday was the 50s, last century. Right? And Reader's Digest, it did what it said on the packet. Here you see the images, though, of more recent Reader's Digest. Secrets of a Sharper Mind. You've got to have a sharp mind. I don't doubt that. But, right, what's the 89 words that will build your brain? Maybe it's true that you just need a little bit of vocabulary to build your brain, but it sort of like belongs to the like information in, injection molding, kind of information in, intelligence out. Where does wisdom, where does thought, where does practical understanding is fine, but where does real understanding? And the other one, laugh yourself smarter. Who am I to complain about this? That sounds like fun. I mean, yeah, let's laugh ourselves further by mocking this kind of digest, right? I would laugh at, and I think it's probably smart. And what I have in mind, though, is that Reader's Digest was the old way of reducing things, and often it was in large print, and it was kind of like for pensioners who wanted to. I get the feeling my grandfather had a lot of Reader's Digest volumes, and I get the feeling that he read them because they reminded him of whole books that he read when he was younger. And he doesn't want to read the whole of Moby Dick again, but he wanted to read them. But nowadays, it's even worse than this. Nowadays, you get these internet services that will send you a digested great books read. So you can get Moby Dick in an email that you can consume over your cornflakes at breakfast. Like, woke up, got out of bed, dragged a comb across my head, and shot across the bows of the Pequod, while the captain risked all of our lives chasing that impossible white whale. And then I had a second coffee, and I got Don Quixote and windmills and found out about too many books on chivalry and his friends bringing to die at the end, and I don't have to read the 600 pages of Cervantes novel. I'm up to date. I've caught up with it. And there's like, I now then quick notice I'm late and get out the door and catch the bus and off to work, right? So who has the time to read all these big fat novels? No one. So you get an audio version or a email version, and you have instant literature alongside your instant coffee. Although who can drink instant coffee? Thank God for the coffee shops of Vietnam and not going for this unbearable Starbucks kind of thing. But these abridged versions. I mean, people even have Oxford University Press brought out an abridged version of Das Kapital. I mean, for so many reasons, that's wrong. The joy of reading Das Kapital by Marx, for example, would be missed if you abridge it. The best bit about it is the footnotes and the fun that he's having, calling the capitalists Mr. Moneybags and talking about the sycophant John Stuart Mill and railing against the political economists like Malthus, population Malthus. Fun. I mean, if you abridge those things to give you what they say is the key information, you're reducing knowledge to information and learning to consumption. And people are selling you a bill of goods, like a fake, a false product. You can have a summary of Don Quixote, and know what happened to the Night of the Sorrowful Countenance, and so, or you can watch the film version, which is sort of another reduction as well, and miss what's great about literature, that it's the reading of it. A bit like, I don't know, what's happening with online. I've been reading about online internet travel. So you can now go to the beach online. It's not the same. It's not the same. Or you can go to the mountains. I mean, seeing the mountains, a picture of the mountains and being there maybe is not as different. It's different, but it's not as different as the difference between seeing a beach and being at the beach. Because, you know, you're not going to get wet online. If you are, you're doing it wrong. Well, yeah. See, this is a tendency. We need to do acknowledge that there's a fantastic Borges story. Jean-Luc Borges, the author, mid-century, last century, he wrote a short story. He wrote on Cervantes, but he wrote a short story about these people who made fantastic maps. Thinking about your Google Maps example, fantastic maps. They made maps that were so accurate that people decided to live in the map, because it was, the good thing about the map was that it didn't decay like real life. And eventually real life started to get all kind of tatty and blow in the wind, and it was lost somewhere in the desert, whereas the map was still pristine and perfect and had the population living there. And then this became a premise for Second Life, online gaming, and people living, or the TV show Caprica, or so on, and yeah, Google Earth and all those things are heading in that direction, which means that there is a possibility of paying attention to this stuff. There's a dialectic involved here. And one level where being asked to flit from one thing to the next and consume the culture, past culture, all on screen, all available all the time without any effort. And the other level, it is recreating exactly those events of life, of cultural life in full in digital versions. And that's an interesting contradiction that we have to consider, right? To what extent can the critique of the fake world of the digital be overdone, because some really fantastic things are achieved by the technology, because a camera can see more than an eye can see, for example. You can put a camera in a drone and see blah, blah, blah. You can slow down, you can speed up, you can focus in on stuff that the eye, you can see further than the eye can see with a camera. Orson Welles knew that you could manipulate what is on screen as well. And that's why the film essay was important in the period, because it did all that in a way that TikTok doesn't really, and doesn't even try to, admittedly. Doesn't try. But all right, so the film essay, how about it as a mode of assessment? Because it became in the late 90s, I guess, in Britain anyway, with the rise of visual anthropology and visual sociology, and into the 2000s and up to today, it became a real option for it became a part of teaching the new disciplines of disciplines changed. Visual anthropology and sociology started to take on these new areas because it was part of the world, so it had to, but also it became a very cool and trendy aspect. So visual sociology, for example. And, we're doing it actually right now. This course is kind of the inheritor of that, and ethnography courses, ethnographic film courses, sorry, But they really started in the 90s, or the late 80s, the early 90s. And there were big, huge debates about how you might have students produce films instead of essays in these courses, because it was a media course, or because it was visual anthropology or visual sociology. And how would you assess that? Because the image is very different to a paragraph, very different to, right. I mean, I think part of the problem was that the anxiety about assessing the image was also anxiety about assessing writing, because if writing was more poetic or literary, how do you assess that anyway, right? You can assess whether information is right or wrong, but you can't assess whether poetry is. I mean, you can have a personal opinion whether it's bad or not, but you can't assess it. And filmmaking often, always, lent towards the emotion, the poetic, the literary, the story, rather than analysis. I mean, well, there was the question. What would analysis look like in films? And the film essay was the space for making an analysis, making an interpretation. So that's what you're being assessed on in your essays, is your interpretation and your analysis. Well, you know, a part of what you're being assessed on is whether you got the facts correctly, but that's, anyone can do that nowadays. You look them up on, you know, Wikipedia, but that's the death of the essay. The essay itself is a written version of an interpretation, a story, an interpretive, analytical perspective on things. And a film can be that as well. And the film essay was that. So it should have been the same kind of criteria that would assess essays would be applied to films, except with some more attention to image, because you could have a different aesthetic. Beautifully shot, fantastic camera work. But it would still be like questions like, did the person really get to know their subject? Do they know what they're talking about? Have they done the background work required? Have they considered this question or that question, ethics and so on? And you know, that discussion was happening at the same time as nearly everyone was starting to get cameras. So when visual anthropology emerged as a discipline, it was still quite expensive to get a good camera, a camera sufficient to make images that could be edited and made into a film. I mean, you could borrow video cameras and so on, but the editing stuff for video, I made my first films editing video, was incredibly difficult compared to today. You'd be running these tapes backwards and forwards, your eyes would become completely square, you would know the images frame by frame, and it was a kind of crazy making thing. And it's became in the 80s, you got Explorer, Final Cut Pro, and all those things emerged. I've even forgotten what some of those early programs are called now. They were expensive, and then they became more accessible. And eventually, you know, now everyone has editing software in their pocket. So what does it mean that everyone has a camera at last? You know, the great democratization. Does it mean that people make better or worse films? Are we more adept at framing, at interpreting, at analyzing the world visually? Have we developed a visual aesthetic? Or, I mean, think of your photos. Hardly any of them probably get seen, even by yourself. You take them, you put some of them on a social media site, but the rest either get deleted or they're in storage somewhere and you'll never look at them again. Maybe you'll see them again by accident when you're flipping through years later or so on. There's an incredible redundancy of images, to the point where to go back 10 years it's possible to have a very detailed collection of 10 years ago, of your life 10 years ago, because you've still got, many people still have all of the digital images in their updated device or in some old device or on some now not quite working hard drive that they used to use. Whereas if you go back 30 years, like I was doing the other day, if you're old enough to do that, as I am, much, or what, 40, I was looking at photos taken in 1978, and there were only about 300, and they were all negatives in folders. I had to get a special device to even be able to see them again, to retrieve them from oblivion almost, because I'd saved only the negatives, of course, because not everything got printed. So, and then I was able to pull out, but very few. We didn't take as many photos as people do now because the digital can just, storage is cheap and you just snap, snap, snap until you get one in focus. So this question about whether everyone takes better or worse photographs, you don't even have to worry about getting things in focus because you take 10 and you select one that's good, you know. There's even a device on this that will interrupt when you press go. You press the shutter, the fake shutter that makes a shutter sound but is not really a camera shutter. It's a device that will wait until your subject is smiling before it opens the aperture of the camera. The skill of photography has been mechanized. I mean, it's also good for me anyway that the camera can get itself in focus, because that was, looking back at my old photos, that was the thing that I was not good at doing with my 35mm camera. My eyes are such, I'm short-sighted, I think it is. I mean, I need glasses for far away, right? So quite often things were out of focus. And that's ruined when it's a negative, analog negative. You can't retrieve that stuff. Anyway, one of the other things about the video, the photography sharing formats, Instagram or even Facebook, is that your past is randomly repackaged for you, right? Facebook, the Meta Corporation, or whatever it's called nowadays, cares about you so much that it thinks sometimes that you'd like to see what you were doing 6 years ago or 10 years. Somehow the algorithm likes to remind you of some event. I mean, and it doesn't get it wrong that often, but sometimes it reminds you of things that maybe, you know, you didn't want to know about. The embarrassing party, or the person that you used to go out with that you don't go out with anymore. Or, I mean, but mostly the algorithm's pretty sensitive to those kind of things. Well, how we get into this world where even the past is next for consumption, not for contemplation, and not something that you actively go and do. It's thrown up to you as the next thing. The next thing can even be the past, your past, as something to consume, as if it belongs to someone else almost. So when Hortense Spillers, the great Black American professor of you know, great stature and standing for the history of Black studies, for example, says that she makes a choice, a political choice, to look at style and idiomatic aspects of work. There's something really important in what she's saying, which is kind of slow down and don't be dragged into the flow of mass consumption. She cites Gayatri Spivak as an example of why this is dangerous. She cites Gayatri Spivak and talks of how when there are attacks on the cause of Black studies, when Black studies tried to unpick the ideology of racism and did so with a sophistication that was matching the history of philosophy or culture studies or theory, right, that had this same sophistication as, say, the Frankfurt School and so on. Many people went, oh, no, can't you speak plainly, speak normally? Why are you having to do all this theoretical? So the idiomatic, the particularity of having to spend time to make a critique of why the accepted images of scholarship favored white America, old American men, philosophers, whatever, had to be unpicked carefully and in detail and with a language that was theoretically difficult, sure. To complain about that, to say, Spivak's work is too difficult, or somebody is speaking in a language that's high theory, and wouldn't you be better off talking clearly to people? That was a displacement and a carefully managed kind of put down. Don't get out of how it was pernicious. It was like saying, don't get so uppity black folks, talking sophisticated theory because that area is owned by the dominant. And in a way, that's also true for the language and the ways in which film operates. So that at the very time that the film essay was trying to say something different about the media, there was also a kind of dominant that was going, why do you have to make these complicated so-called political films that are ambiguous or dialectic or what? Can't you just speak plainly and so on? So the idioms of the film essay, right, which required a bit of work on the part of the viewer, has to work sometimes to work out what's going on, to understand the significance of what they're seeing. That was the idiomatic. I explained what I mean by idiomatic. Idiomatic is almost like, right, it comes from language studies. And what's great about it, right? We talked about translation in one of the classes, I can't remember which, but what's what's interesting about the idiomatic is the idiomatic can be, you can use that word to talk about what can't really be translated from one language to another, or from one interpretation, one perspective on things to another. You have to say things in your way, right? And people have to recognize that expression can't simply be turned into information without losing something. Can't be translated in full, right? So, and that's important for understanding each other and understanding others and understanding culture. So, like, it will be a imperious or arrogant, an incredibly aggressive, pernicious assumption for me to think, or for someone to think, anyone to think that Vietnamese culture or a culture can simply be completely understood and translated into English and put in the shelf, and the book on it will be there, right? Or that the meaning of some expression can be represented by someone else in full without there being any I think what's important is that there be always recognition that there's space for other interpretations and other possibilities, so that even someone explaining a film to you is only giving an interpretation, or even a film essay, right, is only an interpretation. And the good thing about contemplation, or going slowly, or being mindful of the possibility that interpretation is one interpretation, but there are others. There may be others. And the idiomatic is that thing that marks that space for opening up interpretations, multiple interpretations of something. And maybe the idiomatic is what's particular to you, particular to your culture or a class group or an age group or a friendship group, right? In the idiom of TDT, for example, right? We have certain idioms. They're almost like standard interpretations of things, you know, that we have as somehow they're markers of who we are, but they are shared idiom interpretation of the world from here that can't look the same from somewhere else, from another university or from another country or from another, right? And of course, it's different for every person. So the idiomatic is this really useful concept. The idiomatic is also what is not translated by Google Translate or what is not translated in translation. It's why that when you translate something from one language to another, you're making a new thing because you can't carry across all of the idiom, all of the nuances of meaning, which are internalized to the speaker of the original, like, because it's who they are. Like it comes to them with their mother's milk, so to speak. It's a part of their character. And that isn't simply information that can then be recoded into another idiom, another set of language, right? So, you know, the question there is, right, can there be idiom of the film essay, idioms of film? And so we interpret them according to different traditions. And black cinema, for example, has its own idiom, or black diasporic black British cinema. Think of the great examples of Handsworth songs or the there are many different traditions that we need to take time to say, well, you need to really do some work to understand what is going on there, and you won't ever completely get because you'll have your own interpretation, but it's worthwhile having that interpretation. We can get into thinking about what is being produced in those film essays and learn something for our own then reproduction or creative work in a way that isn't happening with the rapid consumption of images on Facebook or TikTok, at least in the way that I see conventional use. Now, I might not be getting the idiom of Facebook, but it seems that they stream over us rapidly and in that next way, and it's there's a guilty pleasure in that, sure, watching videos of people having car crashes or fantastic accidents with motorcycles, trying to do tricks and having them fail. These are the sort of things that I've been watching recently on YouTube. That's all fine, but actually thinking about things, that's not really so available. So, okay, what is the meaning of this? It makes me think of what your assessment might be for this course, for example. Whether or not you can not make videos, but whether or not you can be creative in serious social research, right? I've been reading, for another course actually, the Frankfurt School Group Experiment and the provocation letter that they used to use to show people's reaction, and how different that is to a kind of research project that is conventional and accepted. Like you will do a quantitative survey or have a set of questions and it'll all be nice and above board. No, their group experiment was to take something really provocative and give it to the Germans in Germany 15 years after the war to provoke them to say something racist or something extreme, right? To get people to have a reaction that was passionate, and then to be able to then to try to analyze that and examine that and recognize that that also could be serious social research. Right? And so I'm interested in that because the film essay is something like that style. It would be anathema to those that think objectivity in science, or think that you've got to have reproducible results and statistics and so on. But it nonetheless told us something about what was idiomatic about Germany in 1960 or whatever, when 15 years after the war, about what they thought about the issues of the war, whether they had exterminated, to what degree they were all complicit in gassing the Jews and things like that. Now, the film essay also was invested in that kind of provocative activity as a kind of research. In fact, the film essay was a kind of research project. It's saying, this is the topic, I'm investigating it, I'm using the camera as a kind of research tool. And for that, it's fantastic, interesting, and deserving of our time and attention, I think. So, the motive behind a film essay could be one of shock, could be one of provoking something. It doesn't have to be a film essay. It could be a photo collage, a series of photos. I don't know. My example that I'm giving here for you is this first photo, the wonderful image of the Soviet filmmaker, not the I want to say opponent of Dziga Vertov, Sergei Eisenstein. Eisenstein, who made October, who made Battleship Potemkin. These great film essays, Strike, right? There were early film essays, but they were early celebrations of the Bolshevik Revolution, right? Strike. And Potemkin was about the uprising of sailors, in the Battleship Potemkin in 1905, the failed revolution, Russian Revolution, 1905, that was in the lead up to the successful 1917 revolution. Eisenstein also made Ivan the Terrible and risked the wrath of Stalin and so on. But here he is photographed, shaking hands, sort of, with the postcard he sent back from Hollywood, shaking hands with Mickey Mouse, the famous rodent created by Walt Disney, who in fact is the guy that in the second photo, Sergei Eisenstein has his arm around. That's Walt Disney, who drew Mickey Mouse. I mean, that's when he was young. He's more usually photographed as this older guy, right? Now, there was a time when this would be shocking news, but Walt Disney was himself famous for being rabidly anti-communist. I mean, that's well established now. He put people into the House Un-American Activities Commission. He blackballed communist writers from his films. He to the point that they had to hide their politics. I mean, there was quite a lot of communist politics in Hollywood at a certain time. Think of The Wizard of Oz, right? When you wish upon a star somewhere over the rainbow where dreams come true, right? Over the rainbow is the promised society, where dreams come true, right? Where when you wish upon a star, your desires and poor old working class Scarecrow and Tin Man and Lion have to help Dorothy get to the promised land, which is communist utopia, somewhere over the rainbow, or Oz, or whatever, in a dream, right? It's an aspiration for a society other than the one in which we live in, which was, for them in The Wizard of Oz, was a terrible Dust Bowl, middle farming America. Right? Anyway, here is the most famous communist filmmaker with his arms around anti-communist Walt Disney, the most famous anti-communist in Hollywood, right? And that joining of these images together is could once have been a bit shocking, right? What's you know, Eisenstein's whole thing in filmmaking was montage. He would be able to use montage to shock. In his film essays, that was his device, right? To put an image of the I don't know, the sailors on the Potemkin were complaining about the food, and and there's an immediate cut to a carcass of a dead animal with maggots crawling through its eyes and so on. And there's horrific jump cuts that were designed to shock and make people step back. But the montage then was unheard of, unlike what we saw in film up to then, which is the continuity of the image, the storytelling of the image. You went flow from, at most you went from one character speaking to another character speaking. Right? To have used montage to make a point was something rare and unusual. But now it's completely conventional. In fact, it's a staple of advertising. Right? If you look at any advertisements now, you'll see that they have these. Montage is a device in cinema because it's the emblem of flickering attention, right? That your attention zaps from one thing to another. So it's in fact become the methodology of contemporary commercial culture industry, right? Beloved of the market, brought to you by Walt Disney, brought to you by, right? So when they meet, Walt Disney and Eisenstein, and when Eisenstein meets Mickey, we're well on the way to the complete commercialization of that poor rodent as a symbol of everything capital, right? Eventually it becomes the Mouseketeers, right? Is this even something you've ever seen before? The Mouseketeers? You know about that? M-I-C-K-E-Y, M-O-U-S-E, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck. Yep, hi, look it up. The Mickey Mouse Club was a big organization done to get the kids into pro-Mickey Mouse, so anti-communism, to get them to join. And Annette Funicello, who we see here, was America's heartthrob, the number one Mouseketeer when she was young. They used to wear these stupid, evaluation, ears. She eventually became the Beach Beauty, and she was in the series of beach films with Frankie Avalon, Beach Party and the Beach Boys songs and so on. But she was still America's heartthrob, and so on. But there was definitely something in the Mickey Mouse Club youth that was about recruiting people to Club America and that whole ideology. I mean, the only thing that you see nowadays about the Mickey Mouse Club, because it was quite it was obscene. It was like the Hitler Youth in so many ways. Is the soldiers at the end of Full Metal Jacket, the Vietnam War film by Stanley Kubrick, after they've raped and killed their way through the urban battle zone filmed in London, right, of Vietnam, they are weirdly singing the Mickey Mouse song, M-I-C-K-E-Y, but in a kind of haunting way at the end of that film. It's powerful, but very, very twisted Stanley Kubrick weirdness. But film essays should be about things that provoke you to see things differently than you used to see them. So recognizing Mickey Mouse as a lever to insert anti-communism into the youth of America, actually, that should be no surprise nowadays. Right. Okay. Let's take a pause, a break. Afterwards, I want to look at a bit of one of the film essays that really had something to say, Koyaanisqatsi. Why I want to look at this, I should frame it a little bit. Koyaanisqatsi was one of the let's say, film essays, like If It's for Fake or Sans Soleil or L'Âge d'Or, Chien Andalou, that really changed the way people thought about both the world and the technology. And the thing about Koyaanisqatsi, as you watch it later, there's a lot of things you'll see are completely standard camera techniques that are used by advertising or used in your phone. There are devices on your phone now that in 1982 were completely original, completely new, and people. I mean, they knew they existed. They saw them in, film running backwards. We saw that in the Beatles or in popular culture occasionally, but to have it all combined together in one sequence was quite incredible, because instead of just being a gimmick, this film made it an object of contemplation. So like the way in which sped up images of traffic, which is what you see here, could be familiar in, I don't know, this could easily have been the moment in Star Wars when the Millennial Falcon finally gets to jump into light speed, or the moment when Back to the Future, the car, what could be a couple of seconds in those kind of films as a Hollywood gimmick were turned into objects for contemplation in a film essay that made you think about the world in a different way, how images made you think about the world in a different way, how your brain was beginning to be rewired by the technologies of film that we have then. And for us watching it now, because it's 40 years ago, is a little bit strange, because we have to think back to try and catch the idiom of that film, that its interpretation, and how that was somehow what now seems completely familiar and commonplace was something provocative in those days. But anyway, we'll take a step back first, have a break, make your coffee, and have some questions or whatever about what I've just been saying. Fill out the questionnaire on the e-learning, and come back in